You don't go back to the Rose Bowl by accident. In 1927, Alabama survived Stanford. In 1931, John Monk Campbell led a shutout. In 1935, Dixie Howell and Don Hutson changed how the game looked. And in 1938, Pasadena reminded everyone it takes as much as it gives. Across 4 trips, Alabama stopped being a guest and became a standard. This is the story of the Rose Bowls that proved 1926 wasn't a fluke.
Well, Rick, it's great to be back with everyone talking about the 1926 Rose Bowl. And we're going to continue our conversations today about a few other Rose Bowls that we've been in. And it's our honor to have Mark Mayfield back with us. Mark and I have been friends a long time. We've started on the Crimson White staff together. He's an author of several books on Alabama football, including one he and I co-wrote on the 2012 national championship called Crimson Domination. And we are the co-authors of Remember the Rose Bowl book, soon to be published by the Bryant Museum. And Mark, thank you for returning, being back with us. Good to have you.
Oh, thank you, Tommy. It's great to be back with you. And Rick, thank you as well. And it's great to be included in on this great podcast. You're all doing a great job. And again, thanks for having me. Just happy to be here.
Well, Mark, thanks. We had such a fun conversation about the 1925 season and the 1926 Rose Bowl, and we're just going to keep going right on. Couple things. First of all, housekeeping wise, Tommy, that is the Paul W. Bryant Museum.
Yes, it is.
I was told in the show notes that we needed to make sure that we got that right. And so, Olivia, you're welcome. And I took care of that for Tommy. And also,
thank you.
We do also want to make sure, if folks haven't heard, we actually did win the 1925 national championship, although we didn't really mention that during the podcast that we did on the 1926 Rose Bowl. But as Mark reminded me as we were off air, it was awarded retroactively, and so it is somewhat appropriate that we waited until now to tell you. But if you're just now getting the word, pop the cork.
100 years ago.
Hey.
Oh, that's great.
All right. Well, we're gonna 1926 and our trip for the 1926 Rose Bowl was monumental, and it was a first, but it certainly wasn't the last. And so Mark, in 1927, we find the Tide back in the Rose Bowl. What was so significant? I mean, we talked about the incredible opportunity to be invited to play in 1926, but how much more incredible is it and significant that we were invited back in 1927?
Yeah, I think they liked us out there. You know, I mean, it made it. Yeah, once Alabama was able to get over that bias against Southern football, so to speak. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus for that.
Sure.
We talked about it in the last time. Once they got over that and they went out and actually won the game and showed what they were made of and how good this program was, it was so much easier to get the invitation the next time when they also have a great season. And you know, basically Wallace Wade had talked to they had pretty much told him, you guys have a good year and we'll have you back out here. You know, there had been talks a bit like that. And so Alabama finds himself with an invitation again, and they're back out there to play an incredibly tough Stanford team, coached by Glenn Pop Warner, the legend himself, you know, in football. And it was, you know, as Tommy said off the air once, you know, he was, you know, this was going to be a challenge because he was considered, he was, you know, basically the most famous football coach in America. Wallace Wade suddenly was on the map and, you know, all this, but Glenn Pop Warner was, you know, truly a legend in football. And so now they're facing a team coached by him, and it's a really good team. It's a dominant team. Once again, they were underdogs going into this game. And so everything was on the line. The Rose Bowl Stadium itself had added 5,000 more seats, so it was going to be a bigger crowd. Demand was off the charts for this game. because now people knew what Alabama could do. And also Stanford being, in California, Alabama had faced a team from Seattle and Washington, the University of Washington, in the first game in the 1926 game. Now they were going to face a Northern California team in the Rose Bowl in Southern California, but a lot of demand for these tickets, and the prices were off the charts, and it was going to be a packed crowd. But another great trip for Alabama. They sort of recreated the same sort of, different kind of train ride going out. They took a more direct route. They got there a little bit quicker. But same thing, huge rousing send-offs for them and all that. And, and they went out there, and this was a fine football team. And I mean, think about that, how hard that was. We talk about, undefeated in 1925 season, and then going 10-0 when they won the 26 Rose Bowl. And here they are right back again, unbeaten, and they're going to face Stanford in a really tough game. But what an amazing run for Wallace Wade and that program over those couple of years. And this was going to continue too, as we know, into later Rose Bowls. But an amazing feat as they went to, prepare to face Stanford in that game.
Absolutely. And Mark, as far as the national buzz, it didn't let up, right? Like this was the buzz and the notoriety around this team just continued to build and build and build across that 1926 season, and really brought the 1927 game at a fever pitch. Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say. Absolutely. Again, dispatches from the trains, the build up to it, all of this, out on the West Coast itself, major deal. As we talked about in the earlier podcast, it's just, college football was gaining. We even say in the book, in the chapter talking about this game, we talk about the popularity of college football itself. For the first time, the Army-Navy game drawn in Chicago at Soldier Field, drawn 110,000 people. Amazing for 1926 season, and going into the 1927 Rose Bowl game. So, yeah, it if anything, the press coverage was, first of all, it was the one before that, Bama won, really put Southern football on the map along with Alabama's program. But this one was, the anticipation of it was extraordinary. Yeah.
Well, I think as folks that are listening to the podcast that maybe aren't, they're not as familiar with the history of college football, one of the things that just continues to be, I just think it's remarkable about the University of Alabama is that you look at the history of college football and all of these, kind of seminal moments along the way over the history of college football. Alabama always has a way of being there. We just have we have an unusual way of just showing up and not just showing up, but showing out and really, being a part of the center history. And this is certainly the case, but Tommy, it wasn't just press buzz. There was also a formidable team that headed out there to play Stanford. And so let's get into the game and just, game that we know. I mean, again, if you're surprised, spoiler alert, the game ended in a tie. And so you don't have to wait to the end of Tommy's comments to find out, but a tie really didn't, necessarily feel completely like a tie for us, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, previous to the game itself, like y'all said, we finished 9-0 that year, which was amazing because we had lost so many great players from the year before, including Johnny Mack Brown, including Pooley Huber. Johnny Mack Brown actually was the freshman team coach and an assistant coach on that 2016-27 Rose Bowl team. So he went back out to the Rose Bowl, and that helped solidify his movie career on that trip out there. But the team itself really was predicted, I don't know, 5th or 6th in the Southern Conference. Matter of fact, Wallace Wade even said before the season that he named several teams in the Southern Conference that were going to be better than them. He just flat out said it. Poor mouthing. We had a coach later on that maybe did the same thing. But So he didn't know what to expect. Well, they finished 9-0. They outscored their opponents 242-20. The previous year it had been 277-7. So 2 great seasons. So they go to the Rose Bowl, and the stat sheet for that game, Stanford scored in the first quarter. Alabama scored in the fourth quarter. That's it, 7-7. And we had our chances. Stanford had their chances. But the interesting thing about that game was Stanford was a heavy favorite. They were sort of the kings of the West Coast. Pop Warner, as Mark mentioned, was the legendary coach. And after that game, even though it was a tie, most folks considered us the victors. And I know on the stat sheet, it's a 7-7 tie. But Wallace Wade had some great things to say about our team and the Stanford team after the game. But Pop Warner got ripped from one side down the other by especially the West Coast media, who were thinking they were going to go in and beat us really bad.
Right.
And so it was a great, I won't say victory, but I guess a moral victory probably was. But what's interesting is there had been a couple of ties in the Rose Bowl prior to that. But from that point on, there's never been a tie in the Rose Bowl game. Of course, in 1995 is when college football went to an overtime system, so they can't have any ties anymore.
Right.
But from 1928 Rose Bowl to the 1995 Rose Bowl, I believe, there was never a tie.
Wow.
And so we were the last team to tie 7-7.
Yes.
But it was, again, a great publicity for Alabama and the train ride back. And as Mark could tell you, when we got back to Tuscaloosa, we were, again, treated like heroes and all along the way.
Right.
Mark?
Yeah. And Tommy, you mentioned the press going after Pop Warner after that game. You know, that we include the quote I'm looking at right now that we include in the book, but it's got to read. It says, you know, this is from Bill Henry writing in the Los Angeles Times. And he goes, this is after the game. Right now, Pop is rather sick of Crimson Tides, and nobody has any right to blame him. One of them rolled in at about 4:45 p.m. Saturday in the Arroyo Seco at Pasadena and washed out a neat 7-point lead that Pop had been enjoying ever since shortly after lunch. Pop wasn't the only one astounded by this natural phenomenon either, because they haven't had a drop of water in the Arroyo Seco for 15 years, let alone. And I mean, it was just wonderful. You know, as Tommy said, this was treated by the sports writers as a victory for Alabama. They blocked a punt with 4 minutes left in the game. Bama blocked a punt to win this game. You know, they didn't run it in. They had to go in from 14 yards out. But this the way they won it. And as Tommy mentioned, Stanford just being such a dominant team, they were expected to win. And so, yeah, Bama could just celebrate it like it was, you know, if there, as we say in the book, if there was ever a tie that felt like a win, this was it. Because very few ties, as we all know, ever feel like wins. But they did what they needed to do, and they kept the momentum up, and they, as Tommy mentioned, they got home to a hero's welcome, and then it set the table for what they would accomplish in more Rose Bowls after that. And I think that's one of the kind of overarching stories about Alabama's Rose Bowl history, is that they established themselves. They weren't one and done. You know, we talked a little bit about this in the first podcast, but they were there to stay, and so it made a difference. And the West Coast, they were getting good press in the West Coast, even though they were, you know, underdogs in these early games. They were winning, or in this case tying, but more wins would be coming after this.
But in the 27 game, I mean, that tie showed that Alabama belonged, and that counted in the national press, and it counted in national notoriety, but it also, again, counted at home. And the fact that that team was coming home to a state and to a region that also believed that they belonged and believed that they had been validated by the things that that the Crimson Tide had done. And so there's a cultural phenomenon that's underway in the midst of all this that's really kind of hard to understate. Well, if we fast forward then to the 1931 game, we talk about a tie that feels like a win. Well, let's talk about a win that really feels like a win. Tommy, talk about the Washington State game and Alabama showing in 1931.
Well, I love this 1930 team and the 31 Rose Bowl team. I have a relationship with the Sinkton family, and mid-late 60s, Fred Sinkton Jr. and his family moved to Gadsden, my hometown, and got to be good friends with them, went to church with them. And Fred Sinkton Jr. was a big part of my life and helped me start at the University of Alabama as an employee in 1982, and loved Fred and his kids, Freddie and Cheryl and Lee. And but through the Sinktons, I got to meet Fred Sinkton Sr. And when I did my book on Alabama football families, I did a chapter on the Sinktons, and Fred Sinkton Sr. is an absolute hero and legend in Alabama football history. Could be along with Barrett Jones, probably the most celebrated football player in Alabama history, including all the academic awards that each of them won. But this 30 team was pretty special, went undefeated in the regular season. But the interesting thing was, prior to the season, Wallace Wade announced he was leaving, effective at the end of the season. And there are stories that Dr. Denny got a little bit too involved in football. Can imagine that. The president of the university meddling, as the words were, in a football program. Dr. Denny was very involved in football, and we owe a lot to Dr. Denny for our football success, no question. But at one time, he got so close at a practice one day that he got hit and run over. That's how close he was to the action at a practice. Nevertheless,
it's an accident.
In 19... Nevertheless, after the 26 season, 27 Rose Bowl, Coach Wade's record slipped a little bit, 2 or 3 losses each season. And get this, the Alabama alumni and the fans didn't like that. Can you imagine that? Them not liking a loss or two. So we have a 100-year tradition of
I'll refer you to social media from Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah. From the first quarter of the Oklahoma game.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
But continue,
Anyway.
please.
So for whatever reason, and we have a great story in the book about Dr. Wanamaker, who was the faculty chairman of athletics at Duke, had met Wallace Wade, who was also the AD at Alabama, keep in mind. So at a Southern Conference meetings, Dr. Wanamaker had met Wallace Wade. Well, Duke was looking for a football coach prior to the 1930 season. And
are we talking Wanamaker Trophy Wanamaker here? Is that, I wonder if that's the
Mark,
case.
I'm not sure. I guess I think maybe.
How many Wanamakers could there be?
Right, I don't feel like they're just falling off trees. So I just wondered.
Well, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
We'll have to check on that. But so anyway, he writes a letter to Wallace Wade in the spring of 1930 and said, "We're looking for a football coach at Duke. Do you have any recommendations?" And Wallace Wade wrote back a letter to Dr. Wanamaker and said, "Yeah, I've got 4 people who are interested." And Hank Crisp, one of our assistant coaches, was one of the names that he recommended. He mentioned 3 others. And then he ended the letter back to Dr. Wanamaker by saying, now listen, if you'll be willing to wait until after the 1930 season, I will be interested in your position.
Wow.
And I'm sure Dr. Wanamaker, when he read that, probably fell out of his chair. Can you imagine Wallace Wade saying in a letter that he might be interested in the head coach position? So, long story short, they got together, and Wallace Wade at that time in the spring of 1930, this is 4 months before the 30 season even started, agreed to become the head coach and AD at Duke after the 1930 season was completed. So they went into the 1930 season with basically a lame duck coach, but Coach Wade wanted to make sure they did not have a lame duck performance. And they blitzed through everybody in 1930 season. And Fred Sinkton tells some great stories from that season. But that was the season, and people have heard about it for years, of the shock troops. It's something the media called, I'm not sure where the name came from, but it was called the shock troops. And the idea was that he started the second team and played the second team pretty much all the first quarter. And it was designed so that the first team could be on the sideline and be in talks with the coaches to see what the other team was doing and some strategy and all. And it would rest them, give them. So when they went in the second quarter, it was, Katie bar the door. And so the shock troops led them to an undefeated record and a date against Washington State in the 31 Rose Bowl. And there are some great stories that we have about the train ride going out, the funniest of which is in Phoenix, a group of alumni gave our team a donkey, or a burro, as they call it in Arizona. And they nicknamed it or named it Poison. And Lindy Hood, who was a basketball All-American for us, but was on the football roster, and Mrs. Hank Crisp fed that donkey by a bottle, a baby bottle, all the way out on the train. Now they'd go back to the caboose, to the animal car, and feed this burro. And somebody mentioned we need to bring Poison onto the sideline during the game. And he said, they told Coach Wade that, no, we better not do that, because they may call it a burro out here, but in Alabama, they call it a jackass. And if we were to lose the game, that would not look too good. So we have a photo in the book of Poison back in at the time, Denny Stadium, and around 3 Alabama cheerleaders.
Good night.
I don't know if it was at the spring game. I don't know where it was taken. But anyway, great stories from that 31 Rose Bowl. A lot of colorful characters: Fred Sinkton, John Henry Souther, Frank Howard, who became a legendary Clemson coach and administrator, was on that team. And he was kind of the jokester of the group. But the 31 team or 31 Rose Bowl team is one of the best ever. When the shock troops came in the second quarter, scored 21 points, and we won 24-0, and it was not close. Statistics were heavily in Alabama's favor, and Washington State didn't know what hit them. So,
I don't want to throw you guys a curveball, but I am sitting here thinking about, just in recent history in college football, what it would be like if, or what it has been like to see a coach accept another job and move on in the midst of a campaign, and how different that is than Coach Wade and his decision to stay an entire year and to coach instead of leaving his obligation and leaving his contract. And it really says something a lot about the honor of men and the circumstances under which he served that year. But Mark,
one other thing, Rick, let me tell you one more thing. Coach Wade recommended a young assistant coach at Georgia named Frank Thomas to be his replacement.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's odd and ironic is Georgia was our last victory that year in the regular season. Frank Thomas was an assistant coach on the Georgia sideline watching the team he was about to take over.
Right.
On the other side of the field. And Wallace Wade invited Frank Thomas to ride on the train to Pasadena for the 31 Rose Bowl.
Right.
So Coach Thomas got a close hand look at the players that he was inheriting the next year and their whole routine and to get to know them. And oddly enough, while he was on that train trip, he got a telegram at one of the stops, and Frank Thomas's wife had just given birth to Frank Thomas Jr., who was later to be known as Tucky Thomas. And Frank Thomas III, Tucky's son, wrote a little blurb for our book that's on the back of the book, endorsing it. And so I got to know Frank III in the 1980s when he was a capstone man at the University of Alabama in the 80s. So a lot of stories from that trip. But I will say that Wallace Wade, like you said, had integrity to finish his contract that he had had. So he coached that whole 30 season knowing that he was going to be at Duke the next year as head football coach at AD. And he went there because they were going to give him a big raise and he got a percentage of the gate receipts.
Right.
Right.
Can you imagine how much money this day and time a coach would get as a percentage of the gate receipts? Whew.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, 31 season, 31 Rose Bowl was a great time. A lot of funny stories from that
That's a
year.
pretty good deal, Tommy. That's almost as good as getting a bonus for the team that you're not coaching anymore.
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave that right there where I found it. We're going to move on.
Yeah.
And
Isn't that amazing?
and Mark, but Mark, there's a huge symbolic weight to what this victory did and what it really solidified about Southern football, right?
Right. I mean, again, Alabama now has, with this win, they've been out there, they've won 2, they've tied 1 with this 31 Rose Bowl victory. Wallace Wade has been the captain of the ship. He's been the coach for both of those. He is a if he were here today, I'm sure he'd kill me for calling him a superstar coach because he was so no nonsense, but he was. And and that's why if anybody could get gate receipts, it would have been him, and he got it. So yeah. So it was an amazing run he had here, but yeah, I think I am so impressed by the fact that he did invite Frank Thomas, who was going to succeed him, to go on the train with him, to be there, to really sort of soak in, and obviously the message to Thomas that, hey, this, you got some shoes to fill here, but you can do this. This is our program. This is what we built this program to, and the expectation will be that you'll continue this. I mean, I'm not saying he said that directly to him, but that was the message lately. And a lot of pressure on Thomas too, right? I mean, there was a lot of pressure on Thomas succeeding this, and we've talked about it, as we're going through the book. But yeah, it's like it's like the pressure on Ray Perkins taking over for Paul Bear Bryant, the pressure of Kalen DeBoer taking over for Nick Saban. I mean, that was that in its own way, in its own day. That's the same thing. This Alabama team was elite at that point. They were the top of the world in terms of college football, and they had established this presence and winning national championships. Won at that time retroactively. Won it in 2017. They were retroactive, and of course, retroactive national champions in the 25 season, 26 Rose Bowl, and the 26 season, 27 Rose Bowl, and the 30 season, 31 Rose Bowl. But they were continuing that. So yes, it was again just becoming in the world of college football, we were seeing a big change from just the Colgates, the Dartmouths, and the Princetons, and the Penns, and the and the West Coast teams of US, Southern Cal and Washington and Stanford, obviously a power, which Alabama would see again in the 1935 Rose Bowl,
Right.
coming up. But yes,
Well, and let's just keep going there. I mean, we're turning the corner on right in a couple of short years. Coach Thomas has the Tide right back in the Rose Bowl again after the 1934 campaign.
yeah.
Why, explain that as a real turning point, I think, in terms of Alabama football and the powerhouse that Alabama had become.
Yeah. Well, again, untold amount of pressure on him. He comes in not only before he even coaches his first game, his mentor, Newt Rockne, died in a plane crash. Coach Thomas had been the quarterback for Newt Rockne, had been, very close to him. And I think it was March 31st, 1931, Newt Rockne dies in a plane crash. And that had to have affected him. Well, he said it affected him. In fact, at one point, Tuscaloosa News quoted him talking about he talked about what a great coach Newt Rockne was, but he said, I can't say anymore. Like he was too broken up to say anymore. He just said that to the reporter. So it affected him. At the same time, he takes this team and within, and by the 1934 season had them at the top of football again. And the team 34 is one of those teams that combines a couple of things. One, Paul Bear Bryant was on that team. So that team was unbeaten. They were dominant in games. We go into depth about Don Hutson and Paul Bryant being the other end to Don Hutson, who became not only the best receiver in the country in college football, but one of the greatest and Hall of Fame players in professional football there's ever been, even to this day. And this team was in 34 under Frank Thomas was also very similar in a lot of respects to the 25 team with Wade, and that there were a couple of big superstars on this team, and that was Dixie Howell and Don Hutson. And it also had a lot of other all-stars on that team. But passing this team, when I look back on the 34 season, I really think about the passing game. It was like air raid would be today. Mike Leach would have loved this team. It was like the air raid of its day when there was people were just running the ball. Here comes this team flinging this thing around like crazy. And I'll never forget we go in the book of they're going in there stomping Georgia Tech 40-0 Atlanta, and the sports writers are just saying they've never seen anything like this, and just bringing this whole thing to another level. The LA Times writing that it's the most impressive football team anyone had ever seen. But outside of Stanford, they were going to. Well, the bottom line is they go unbeaten in that season. They're going to play undefeated Stanford. I think Stanford was 9-0-1, but they had 7 shutouts. They were a solid team again, and Bama was having to play them. But Alabama was coming in there with, maybe perhaps all told the most dominant team they had to that point. All the others were good and great actually, but this team was, just incredible team. So many storylines going into it. They go out there and the largest crowd in the history of the Rose Bowl at that point, nearly 85,000 were there to watch them play. And it was an incredible game with Dixie Howell and Don Hutson. Dixie Howell got more all-purpose yardage on his own than the entire Stanford football team got in that game.
Wow.
313 all-purpose yards. He had 160-yard passing, 79 yards rushing. I'm looking at notes we've got this in the chapters.
Yeah.
2 touchdowns on his own. He threw another touchdown to Hutson. He punted 5-6 times for an average of 43.8 yards, and he returned kickoffs for 74 total yards. He did everything you could do. And then Hutson had 164 yards on 8 8 receptions, just a superstar in the game. But Paul Bryant, and I think that's one of the things, Coach Bryant was very modest and diminished his role in his own book there. He diminished his own role on this, oh, I was just another player on the team. He was not just another player. He caught 3 passes himself that day, but he was brutal, especially on defense against Stanford. He was an outstanding college football player, and he was big, 6'3", 210. The guy was, he was nobody wanted to see him coming at them in terms of the defense, especially. So he got a lot of press himself for that day. And so they went and beat Stanford 29-13. And one of the greatest offensive shows ever up until that time in the Rose Bowl. And there were
one of the things, Mark, I wanted to point out, just because you passed over it really quickly, but from where we were in, if I'm correct, in the 1931 game to the 1935 game, you talked about that the Rose Bowl in 31 was expanded to 57,000 seats, and you said the Rose Bowl was this crowd was in the
84,000, almost 80,000. Yes,
which says an incredible amount about the popularity of college football in the wake of the Great Depression and in the circumstances of the country, and just how much of a focal point this sport had become, and how Central Alabama had become to the story of this sport. It's just, again, to me, this is one of the remarkable parts of this whole narrative, is to watch the continuing drumbeat as the University of Alabama continues to grow in importance, but at a time when the sport is becoming so much more important to the country. And Tommy, I think something I'm interested in, or that maybe folks may find interesting if they've never done this, is that one thing that's different about this 1935 Rose Bowl is that you can go to YouTube and find some pretty good chunks of this game on YouTube to be able to watch it.
Oh,
and
Wow.
and like Mark said, this was different. This team looked completely different. And in many ways that didn't look unlike things that, you might feel comfortable seeing today. Talk about just how revolutionary this was, and what, what Coach Thomas had begun to do at Alabama, and how that was really revolutionizing the sport.
Well, this Rose Bowl made Don Hutson a nationally known name. And what he did in the NFL is still talked about. Here we are, 90 years later. I mean, the Green Bay Packers named their practice facility after Don Hutson. My son and I had a chance to go there in 2009 and went in it for a Packers game. And I know they love him still. And for the longest time, he held like 11 NFL receiving records. And at Alabama, Dixie Howell, was his passer. He was the receiver. We have some great photos in the book of that whole line across the offensive line, I guess it's called. And there's Don Hutson on one end, and there's Paul Bear Bryant on the other end.
Yeah.
And that's why he was referred to as the other end. And like Mark mentioned in the book, I mean, Bryant said, look, Don Hudson they wouldn't have a bank big enough to hold the money Don Hudson would command.
Yeah.
He was such a great NFL player. And 11 years with the Green Bay Packers, and he helped define the passing game in the NFL. What you see today really started with Don Hudson back in the 30s, early 40s. And his name is still legendary in both college football and NFL football. Obviously, All-American, college football Hall of Fame, NFL Hall of Fame. But, like Mark said in Coach Bryant's book, he talked about what a great friend Don Hutson had been, and what a great player he was.
Yeah. One
So
of
Mark,
the
go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say, the Packers. There's one. This story of Alabama and the Rose Bowl is just so obviously filled with anecdotes that just kind of knock your socks off. It's like Curly Lambeau, who was coach of the Packer. Don or Frank Thomas had closed practice because there were so many people coming to see them practice. They were practicing at that point at this Occidental College, which the Rose Bowl designer, the architect of the Rose Bowl stadium itself, Myron Hunt, had also designed most of the campus buildings at Occidental College there, these Mediterranean style, wonderful looking campus. And so anyway, they were having the practice and it was open in the beginning and people were coming out there. So much so, by the way, that Bryant later wrote about Hank Crisp offering money if somebody go hit one, go like catch a ball and run into them or, a whole nother story about that. But Thomas had enough of it. Too many people, closed practice. But Curly Lambeau told a story of literally climbing over a wall there and tearing his pants, his pants, getting over because he wanted to see Don Hutson. And he was there to see Hutson. Now Dixie Howell was fabulous, the other players, but he was there specifically. He wanted to see Don Hutson, and of course, Don Hutson became an incredible player for him, and had his entire career with the Packers. So that's just one of those little storylines. Can you imagine Curly Lambeau climbing over a wall to try to get a glimpse of the Thomas not even allowing in the coach of the Green Bay Packers? I mean, it's sort of like, some of these are, legends, some of the tales, some of these, but this one's one of those Lambeau told himself. And so just so many interesting things. But like Tommy said, it's literally hard to describe how impactful of a player Don Hutson was to this program, Alabama, to the Packers, to college football and NFL football. He's on a short list of, there are a lot of great players through history, but he would be, and he was named to some of the, all-star, all-pro list forever. The all 50-year pro team, NFL starting receiver, the starting end on that team. He was, it's amazing what came out of those games. So the people who watched the Rose Bowl that day, the 1935 Rose Bowl, they were seeing some of the greatest, and Hutson especially, one of the greatest football players to ever play the game at any level. Yeah.
And, I think, Mark, one thing I'd love to hear you just kind of unpack a little bit as well is you talked about Coach Bryant and his role as a player, and the fact that he was much more than the other end, but he was he really was an integral contributor, and what he did for this team in the Rose Bowl. But talk about what the Rose Bowl did for him and what the Rose Bowl did to him, because it feels a little bit like that boy from Fordyce, Arkansas, that, went and saw the epicenter of college football, that there was something about this experience that changed him a little bit and really whet his appetite for, the greatness that he would pursue as a coach and the things that kind of gave his life to. Am I making this up? Did he screen test at some point and maybe have a chance to be an actor, but turned all that down and turned his back on that to be a football coach? Am I building that up bigger than it is?
Yeah. Once Johnny Mack, when, Bryant went out there, Johnny Mack, set up a quick screen test for him at one point. Bryant doesn't talk a lot in his book about, or even in his interviews about it, other than that he loved California. Tommy and I think both come out of this research. Paul Bryant loved going out there. He loved the train ride. He said he describes the free food. Remember this kid was from Fordyce, Arkansas, or more than Florida. Free food, just all for 4 days. He's just out there. It's like that in itself was huge for players like him. Came from that, And so, but in Arkansas, when we mentioned in the book, Bryant tells the story of, the fact that they were, they knew all about Wallace Wade and these Rose Bowls. It's why he wanted to play for them. Hank Crisp drove him out there, drove him to Tuscaloosa. But at one point, what Bryant does also, and I think we mentioned this in the book, Bryant, was going to this all-star game in Texas. He was going with the Arkansas coach because they were, Don Hutson had been from another team there, Pine Bluff. They were out there looking for Don Hutson. But then Bryant, there were a couple stars on Bryant's high school team at Fordyce that were being looked at. But they also were looking at Bryant for Arkansas, doing some recruiting of him. So he finds himself in, I think it was Dallas, I believe, Tommy, as I recall. And he finds himself in an all-star game. And he's with the Arkansas coach who was recruiting him, right? And invites him to go with him to this game. Bryant slips out at halftime so he can go listen to the Alabama Rose Bowl thing in one of those ticker tapes. No, maybe there was a 27 game. I can't remember. But he's out there slipping out with him at that point. So it's just, or maybe that must have been actually the 31 game now that I think about it. But he was flipping out with him to do that. We've got it right in the book, I know. But there's just so many little tales of him. But he grew up, he was with nothing. And so he's involved in this program. The chance for somebody like Paul Bear Bryant from tiny Mora Bottom and Fordyce to get to go to LA and Pasadena, he knew, he appreciated it. He wrote about it and talked about it. And he really appreciated it, as did a lot of those other players on those teams. So it meant a lot to him, but he was a fierce competitor. And I think that comes across in our book. I feel like we did a really good job in the book of pointing out that he was far more than the other end. He was fine with the title of other end, as Tommy mentioned. He said it himself.
Sure.
He was far, far more than that and contributed to those teams. And, there's a whole nother story from the 35 season we can get into, but he broke his leg. But anyhow, with a broken leg. So the guy was a fierce competitor. And I remember the Bryant Museum, the Paul Bryant Museum has a
please let's don't mess that up again. We can't afford that here.
Olivia, we're keeping it straight here. But the museum has did oral histories of a lot of the former players, and one with young Boozer talking about, how dedicated. He had never seen anybody more dedicated to his play than Paul Bear Bryant. Just the dedication of this guy as an athlete in terms of what he was going to go do on the field, and so that was that was thrilling to go back and revisit Bryant's own career as a player. And then in the 1938 Rose Bowl team, the 1937 season, he was an assistant coach for Frank Thomas and goes out at that point for 38. He meets Ronald Reagan, by the way, who showed up to interview the players on that team as a young actor and a radio reporter. So there's lots going on with that. And in fact, Bryant said in his book, Bear, he didn't really want it. They lost that game 13-0. It's the first Rose Bowl they had lost, right? They were 3-0-1 in the Rose Bowl. At that point, they lose that game. The Alabama had an undefeated team in 1937. They go out and play California. They lose 13-0. They weren't as talented of a team as the 34 team that Bryant had been on, but it was still they were still good. And so, but he says basically he didn't want to talk about the loss. He wanted to talk about the trip out there and being out there,
right.
Everything that happened.
The free food.
The free
That's
food.
right.
The free food. So anyway.
Well, I mean, as we start to talk about that we don't want to pass over the 1938 game, because the 38 game means that there was a 37 season that was incredibly successful, that there was another team that is part of the history. And Tommy, what made Cal so hard to beat?
Well, they had a unbelievable running back, similar to George Wilson on the Washington team in the 26 Rose Bowl, named Vic Batari, and he ran all over everybody, not just us, but everybody up until the end. And we couldn't stop him.
Yeah.
And we had multiple turnovers that game. Mark, you remember, was it?
We had 8, four fumbles and 4 interceptions in that game. Just killer.
And just think about that: 4 fumbles, 4 interceptions, and only lose 13-0.
Wow.
And after such a successful season, I think Frank Thomas knew that he'd been playing with house money that year.
Yeah.
And he was very complimentary of his team even after getting beat 13-0 by Cal. But we actually, or I know, we may have our only photo of an opposing player that we highlight is Vic Batari. We have a picture of him in the book running over our Alabama defense. But he was really good. And but it was just another chapter in our very rich Rose Bowl history. And I hated
Mark,
that
I
we
was really
lost it.
doing well. I was doing well until you said 8 turnovers. I was good.
Yeah.
But
Well,
man,
and two of those, Rick, came inside the 10-yard line too, as Alabama was driving. That's 2 touchdowns that would have won the game right there. 2 of them, but Bama got outplayed. It wasn't, they forced those turnovers, and it was,
Yeah.
and, that's tough. You're not going to win a game with 8 turnovers.
Yeah, and Rick, one other thing. Mark mentioned Ronald Reagan, but we have a photo in the book, and I ran actually a photo in my family's book when I did a chapter on the Davis family, Pig Davis and his sons, Tim and Mike and Steve and Bill, all who were kickers, for us at Alabama. And Pig played on that 37 38 Rose Bowl team. And I run a picture of Ronald Reagan, who was an actor and, I guess, radio broadcaster, interviewing our team, or interviewing our players. And we have another angle of that photo that we're running in the book, but we also have a picture of Ronald Reagan and who was it, Mark, the actor out at the hotel?
Humphrey Bogart.
Humphrey Bogart.
Bogart.
Yeah, we have a photo of Ronald Reagan and Humphrey Bogart with our team.
Wow.
Year. Yeah. And actually, and Mark has reminded me of this, but when Ronald Reagan came back to campus, when was it, Mark, in 75 to speak?
Yeah.
He referenced that 38 Rose Bowl trip.
Huh.
Yeah. Incredible. I mean, a small world, because he had met Bryant back then, and here he was with Bryant's team in Praxville in 1975. Really incredible, I think. And making a talk that evening where I'm sure the play, anyway, that was just small world.
Wow. I'm sitting here thinking, I had to let my mind wander for a second. If 8 turnovers, 2 inside the 10-yard line. If you were another school in this state, you might retroactively claim a national championship at that point.
Yeah.
Just saying.
It's possible.
It's possible.
We only claim ours retroactively when we win, folks.
Right.
That's right. By the way, we did win the 27 national championship. I'm not sure we mentioned that.
Yes, we did.
And the 31 and the 30 national championship.
Right. Yeah.
But let's be clear, retroactively, because that's the way they were all awarded.
That's right. And the 34 national championship.
Right.
So we don't want to sign off without mentioning that.
No, I want to make sure, but we didn't claim the 37 championship.
No.
Although others might have.
No,
So
we were the undefeated in the regular season national champions.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
In the polls before the bowl game.
Yes.
And in some places that gets you a banner. But well, guys, we are at the end of the road of the 30s, but we're not anywhere close to the end of the story. And we've got a lot more to go. So I tell you what, how about if we get a little something to drink and change clothes and come back and do this again? We'll come back for another episode, and we will pick up beginning in the 40s and bring things all the way to current times. How about that?
Sounds great.
Great.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Well, for Tommy and for Mark, I'm Rick Morton. We're thankful you're a part of this. As with the Crimson Chronicles podcast with us, we're having a ball talking about Crimson Tide history. Thanks for being along for the ride with us, and we will be back here for another episode. Be looking out just in another few days, and we'll finish the story of Alabama's journey through the Rose Bowl.